Hello everyone, do you want to know if a servant is good enough to spend your hard-earned quartz on? Great, you're in the right place. Welcome to the FGO Gacha Guide. Today's topic servant is Yu, the Beauty. Consort Yu Meiren, she has many different names, our senpai. We will of course be covering what is on screen here. So first of all, we're going to go over whether or not I believe this servant is worth rolling for. So in my personal opinion, Consort Yu is quite weak, and basically bottom tier. Before her buffs, she is toward the bottom of the tier list. After her buffs, she's still going to be toward the bottom of the tier list. You have to play extremely carefully around her NP. Her NP doesn't even hit very hard for all the many drawbacks that she has. She needs buffs now, she'll need buffs after she receives a buff, and she'll be waiting quite some time before she becomes any bit as strong. But as always, roll with your heart over rolling with stats. Let's go over the stats right now, though, as to why she is bottom of the tier list. So, Consort Yu is a 4-star AoE assassin, meaning she's strong against riders and weak to casters. Her attack at level 80 is 7,970, which is one of the lowest in the game, while her HP at 80 is 13,389, one of the highest in the game out of the 4 stars, to make up for the low attack. Her hidden stats show her MP gain per hit is 0.75%. This is nicely above average, pretty good. As for her cards, her Quick has 4 hits, her Arts has 4 hits, her Buster has 3 hits, and her Extra is 4 hits. Pretty average overall, a little below average on the Buster compared to everything. 4 is about the average for modern servants right now. As for her star weight, aka how much priority she has to get critical stars onto her cards over other servants' cards, it is 97, another very average stat, while her star creation is 24.7%, which is extremely high and in line with assassins in general, so she can make stars very well for herself. Overall, her stats come out to be relatively average, with a focus more on health rather than attack, which we will see with her NP and skills is not particularly what we want. So let's go over her deck and her MP. Her deck has 1 Arts card, 2 Quick cards, and 2 Buster cards, a non-standard 2-1-2 deck focusing Quick over Arts. Her Noble Phantasm, Eternal Lament, the Cursed-Blooded Immortal's Song of Grief, is an AoE Buster Noble Phantasm. It has 5 hits, and it, before doing anything, will remove all debuffs on herself, remove all buffs on herself, deal defense-ignoring damage to all enemies, inflict Curse that does 2,000 damage per turn for 5 turns to them, and, based on Overcharge, increase her Buster performance before dealing damage. This will happen after removing her own buffs, between 50 to 100% for 1 turn. This MP sucks. It would be okay if it didn't remove her own buffs first. This means that you have to play around this demerit really hard. You have to play around this extremely hard. If you do remove your own buffs before it hits, you're going to hit like a wet noodle at best. Not many servants can provide buff removal resistance. She has her own, but it's for now only 1 turn, and after a buff will get better, but still, it's extremely unfortunate to have to play around this as much as you have to. Next up, let's look at her passives. Very simply, we have Presence Concealment B. It increases her critical star generation by 8%, a decent passive to help her already high rate of star generation on her cards, and overall one of the better passives in the game, because stars are nice. As for her skills, we first off have Incarnated Spirit. This gives her a 5-turn NP charge of 5 to 10% NP per turn, and gives herself debuff immunity for the turn she activates it. This skill is a pretty good skill overall. It is overall a 50% charge, unfortunately partitioned over 5 turns. Sometimes that's better than having it all at once, but more often than not, you just want that instant 50%. Luckily, this has a 100% uptime, which means that once you have this at max level, she basically is like Merlin, only his is passive and he has skills that do more than that. Anyway, most of the time you're going to want to try to get that 50% right away because you want to be able to shoot the MP now. You don't want to be able to shoot the MP a couple turns from now. Sometimes it's okay to have it a little bit later. That was a little bit low. All right, next we have Heaven's Feathered Woman. This recovers her HP every turn for 5 turns, HP regen between 500 to 1,000. It also increases her buff removal resistance by 50 to 100% for 1 turn. It eventually will get a buff, and it will look like this instead. And move that just a little bit. It will, in addition to that, give herself an attack buff that lasts for 3 turns between 20 and 30%. And the buff removal resistance will last for 3 turns instead of just 1, making it a much, much, much better skill for her. It becomes an actually good skill. For now, it is incredibly lackluster with how it currently is, which it looks like this. And it lets you have the freedom of 1 NP, and then you wait 5 turns before you can MP again, or else you throw all of your buffs away. And finally, we have her third skill, Bloodsucker. This skill has a 60 to 80% chance to drain one enemy's NP gauge by 1, and charges her own NP gauge by 18 to 27%, which is a very weird charge percent. It's an instant almost 30, which is nice to have, especially in addition to her 10% per turn. And reducing an enemy's MP gauge is nice too. I don't know why it's a chance to reduce instead of just reduce, because meanwhile we've got AoE servants doing that in an AoE with a big Chinese grin on their face. Cough, cough. QSH. So overall, you can see that her skills are based around having permanent buffs almost, because this is a heal regen that is on a 5-turn cooldown that lasts for 5 turns. This is an MP regen that is on a 5-turn cooldown that lasts for 5 turns. She's based around having these up all the time, except that if you ever want to NP, you need this buff removal resistance to do it, otherwise you remove all of your buffs on yourself. Which means that you have to be careful about when you use these skills, otherwise you can't NP or you can't keep the buffs. It makes it very, very difficult to play around her. It makes it so that she's much less straightforward. And I'm just going to pull the NP up again real quick. You'll see that she does normal NP damage. There's nothing boosted or anything like that to make up for this incredible demerit. It is the worst demerit in the entire game in terms of MPs, by far, and the payoff is nothing extra. There's just defense, it's defense ignoring damage, but there's other servants like Emiya that deals defense ignoring damage on their MP for free. So really, there's no reason for it, there's no place for it, and they should either massively buff the damage on her MP or completely remove this demerit so it's not ass to play around. Now, these skills overall are pretty darn good, all things considered. When you put all these skills in a vacuum and ignore her NP demerit, these are pretty good skills. So what do we need to level them up? Because you're going to want to level them up. Unfortunately, U is pretty expensive overall in terms of materials. To max the skill, it's going to take you 12 Ancient Bells of Tranquility, a completely new item, 24 Void Dusts, 60 Night Weeping Iron Stakes, and 12 Dawnlight Reactor Cores, another new item from the current Lost Belt. 2 sets of new items you'll have little to none of going into this, and 2 materials that are often in high demand, being the Void Cocaine and the Night Stakes. It's going to be difficult to level her up, and it's going to be difficult to justify leveling her skills because of just how weak she is. To max her out, it's going to cost you 36 Ancient Bells, 72 Void Dusts, 180 Iron Stakes, and 36 Reactor Cores. This is rough on pretty much everyone's store of materials. Very few people are going to either have all the materials ready or be happy on spending all those materials here. So how does Consort Yu stack up against the competition? Well, as a 4-star AoE assassin, her main competition comes down to Summer Skaha, Summer Nidokris, Kato Danzo, and Summer Ushiwakamaru. As it stands right now, Consort Yu is easily at the bottom of the list, right next to Summer Nidokris, who is also quite bad. She is quite weak, largely due to her NP completely screwing herself over, and after her buff, she'll move up a little bit, but is still pretty lackluster, easily still being outdone by the likes of Summer Ushi and Kato Danzo. Arguably Summer Skaha, but only because Scotty exists. Now, if you do want to roll for her, what skills should we prioritize in leveling? This is likely the only time I'm going to tell you to level something over an NP charge skill. But skill 2 maxing is a must. You need that 100% buff removal resistance. Even for just one turn for now, you need it. When it gets buffed, you still need it even more because it's 3 turns. For her to even begin to function as a character, you desperately need this skill to be maxed. Not high level, but maxed. Because how many times have you had a 90% chance to crit and not crit? 90% might as well be 0%. That's right. Max it. Next, I would probably prioritize skill number 1, as it is an overall better charge. It is an overtime charge, but it, in only 2 turns, is very close to skill 3. In 3 turns, surpasses it. So, easy enough to see where this is nice to level. And finally, skill 3, it has a nice instant NP gain. At max level, it does allow you to equip the likes of a Kaleidoscope or Max Limit Broken Imaginary Round and just NP right away. That being said, if you want to use her anyway, you're probably going to be maxing your skills 10-10-10 to even begin to become strong enough to use. So, really, this is just a suggestion on what I would prioritize if you don't have all the materials now. Now, as for craft essences to equip her with, she's an AoE Buster Servant with no buffs for her cards, so let's focus on empowering her MP, because that's the only way she's going to deal much real damage. First off, we have Aerial Drive. It sports 10% Buster Up, 10% MP damage up, and 50% starting MP gauge. This is all things that we definitely want to have on Consort Yu. It makes it much easier to use her. Next, we have Partake with the King. This gives a 10 or 15% at max limit broken Buster Up, and starts with a 50 or 60% starting NP charge. So, making it pretty easy to get an NP off, along with some nice Buster damage increase. And finally, we have, of course, everyone's favorite, the Black Grail. This gives a 60 or 80% at max limit broken MP damage up. Yu overall has pretty good self-charge, so I think the Black Grail is honestly the best choice on her if you don't need to instantly fire an NP off. So, often enough, I would suggest the Black Grail on her because it's going to take her NP, and even if you do remove your own buffs, still put out some pretty respectable damage. As for servants to group her with, oh look, it's Waver. Hi Waver. He has made the list again. He has his 50% MP charge, attack up, critical damage up, defense up. Pretty no-brainer to add him to most, if not every team. And as Consort Yu is a Buster Servant, Merlin to buff her MP and cards is our obvious support due to his hero creation skill, along with his passive, his MP giving you the passive star regeneration, healing, and MP regeneration is all very nice. You can give her smaller supports like Hans, Christian Andersen, or Shakespeare, but she'll feel pretty darn weak with them. She's honestly in need of big support power, so these two are definitely the main choices I would go with. I honestly can't imagine using a Hans or a Shakespeare with her would feel very good, even just for 1 or 2 turns. Quick too long didn't watch here. Consort Yu is not a good role. Yu is weak. She's one of the weakest assassins in the game, and assassins are weak in general. It's extremely hard to use her well. She has a weak payoff. You have to work very hard to play around her own NP's detriment, when instead you could just easily use a stronger and much easier to use servant for the job that she performs. She desperately needs some help. She really needs some buffs. But if you do need a very good reason to roll for her, it's very simple. She's our cute senpai. Why wouldn't you want to give her some love? So let me know your opinions on Consort U, and if you enjoyed this video, follow me on Twitch, join the Discord, all that stuff. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next Gacha Guide.